won't hear you on the video broadcast. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Good to have you here again tonight. So we got some good stuff again this week, this month. We have two great talks for you, both of which I'm excited to hear from. Our first speaker, Alan. They're always talking when you're talking about them. Go ahead. Finish your conversation. We'll come back. So this is John. Everybody clap for John because he made sure all this happened tonight. Do you have any details you could share about upcoming user group meetings that we already have ironed out? Yes? Have one. Could you pull it up?
Okay. We've been trying to be a lot more proactive in getting the meetups out there on meetup.com. So the next couple of months are kind of laid out. The Azure Bootcamp one is getting popular fast. We might actually have to put a capacity on there because a lot of people are accepting for that. So more and more, if you're not part of meetup.com, we're using that to kind of gauge our numbers for how many are going to show and kind of gauge capacity. It is Saturday, April 21st. I think 50 are already going without it being publicized all that much. So that's it.
Thank you, John. I really appreciate him helping out. So we have two events, really, two Azure-related events. The one he just mentioned, which we're doing with Architect Now. It's kind of a joint thing that we're doing in lieu of our next month's user group. So it's on a Saturday. So make sure you check that out. But there's a bigger thing going on, which Michael wants to tell you about. And it's a different thing. So don't be confused. This is another thing. Michael?
So you guys are writing this down, right? So it's not necessarily a bigger thing. There's a lot of, we're riding the Azure train, if you will. So my name is Michael Kierman. I work for Microsoft. And my team is actually doing full-day workshops through a whole bunch of different cities. And what it's focused on folks like you, developers, right? And how you can leverage Azure Platform as a Service services to do things faster, right? Make your world easier. So the format, what makes this workshop unique is we'll do like 45 minutes of presentation, then break you out into groups to do architectural design sessions. So kind of get you thinking about cloud native and cloud first type of solutions in Azure. So that's what's going to makes us unique. I mean, if you want to watch presentations, you could do that all day long by getting on the WebEx like today, or going to Channel 9 or something like that. I think you'll get a lot of value by breaking out into groups and doing some exercises. The URL to register for St. Louis, well, let me take a step back. We're taking this workshop through Oklahoma City, Kansas City, and St. Louis all in 1 week. So we're doing our road tour. But in St. Louis, that is the URL. So pull your cameras out, take a picture. Need you guys to register. For those of you guys who don't know, Microsoft has moved down to the Cortex, and Doherty Business Solutions took over the 11th floor at City Place. And this is where it's going to be held. It's going to be held at the old Microsoft office. And for those of you guys who don't know, that's where we used to have the user group meetings, right? So see you there. That will be April 26th, right, Mike Green? Yep. Okay.
I think you'll get great information out of both of those events. So make sure you sign up quickly because both of them are filling up. So tonight you had food and you had some drinks. We are very grateful for that, aren't we? We're especially grateful we didn't have pizza. Any applause for that? There we go. Our friends from Adaptive Solutions are here to talk to us. They're the ones who graciously paid for that food. So thank you, gentlemen. I'll let you decide who gets the mic.
Thanks so much, guys, for letting us come out. I'm Shane with Adaptive Solutions Group. This is Dane. Yeah, hopefully everybody enjoyed the food. Obviously, there's still a ton left, so chow down on that. But yeah, I'm one of our lead recruiters over at Adaptive and working on a lot of our .NET positions for the majority of my time at Adaptive. So obviously, not to sound like a broken record, we're always looking for .NET developers, heavy C#, whatever it is. So if there's anything we can help you out with, I left some cards over there by the entrance. Obviously, would love to hear from you guys. Thank you.
All right, so one more thank you. Every month since we started coming here, we are very grateful that they let us in. And a couple of those months, I have dropped the ball and not thanked them for that. So I want to especially thank them tonight because there's some new things that are happening, and John's going to tell you about it. So John, thanks for letting us come, and tell us what's new.
Hi, my name is John Maglione. I'm a recruiter for Worldwide Technology Asynchrony Labs. Tonight, you don't have to worry about taking pictures of anything Michael put up here because we're recording this, and then we're going to release the URL, and Scott's going to be able to post it somewhere. So you'll be able to come back and watch Alan talk about stamps and Cliff talk about smelly stuff. So this is one of our headquarters buildings. You might have seen our new headquarters building over by Westport Plaza, Asynchrony Labs. Most of our people are downtown, but we've opened an office out here in building 2 buildings over. So we're hiring people for out here. Always looking for good C#, Java, and JavaScript people. So if you have an interest in working for a place like Worldwide, let me know. And thank you for coming.
So we've had well over 100 user group meetings of this group. It's hard to believe, isn't it? I think we've recorded 2, so this will be the 3rd one. So that's kind of crazy to think about. Here we go. Alan, you nervous? Nope. Nope. So many of you know Alan. Alan, come on up. Alan's going to be our first presenter tonight, and you see right there on the screen what he's going to present about. He has had mad presentation skills for years. This is the first time we have invited him on stage, so our apologies for that, Alan, but welcome to the stage. Wow them with your experience.
So my name is Alan Barasch. I've been a stamp collector for a whole lot longer than I've been a developer. And I've been a developer a long time. I'm a secretary of 5 of the 7 stamp clubs in town. And I build a lot of PowerPoint presentations to present at those clubs. The one you're going to see tonight is something I've been developing for about 10 years, and it's lots of stamps that show something to do with technology. So we'll get started because this is supposed to be a lightning presentation, and I said we could go through it quickly. In the beginning, computers were huge. They were very huge. And one of the first one was the ENIAC. And so what we're seeing here is a cancellation about ENIAC at the Purgatory Stamp Show in Nashua, New Hampshire. Nashua was very famous in the early days of computing because they made floppy disk there. The very first stamp that showed a computer thing came out in 1964. 1964. And it came from Israel, and it shows us a reel-to-reel and punch card. You know who Babbage was. He built the first computer. And this was in 1839. It wasn't electronic. It was very mechanical, but he's shown on several stamps from Great Britain and Guinea-Bissau. Malodorous automated the 1890 U.S. Census. And it was a punch card type thing. He was founder of the tabulating machine company that eventually went through a lot of iterations and became IBM. And here he is. He's honored on a stamp from Romania. Alan Turing. He invented a computer device. It was a lot of little whirling wheels, but it would duplicate what the German Enigma machine was doing, and they would get the translation of German plans ahead of time. Jack St. Clair Kilby helped build the first integrated circuit while he's working at Texas Instruments. And Admiral Grace Harper, she did it all. She was the very first programmer. And here she is. She's on a stamp from Romania. I don't know. I don't think of Romania as being that technical, but they put out a lot of stamps with computer things. So here's some other people that have been shown on stamps that are technical. Tom Watson was from IBM. Bill Gates on a stamp from Palu. Who's a trivia person? You know where Palu is? Yes, somebody knows. John van Neumann was a pioneer in quantum mechanics. Huh? Oh, thought I heard something. He's shown on stamp of the United States and one from Hungary. And then some other companies. Palu seems to issue a lot of stamps for funny reasons. But we get Bob Kahn, and we get Bob Metcalf and Bezos. Barbados even issued a stamp showing one of the boats that was in the America's Cup that says 3Com on it. Wow. We all know that Al Gore invented the internet. Remember that? Well, Tim Berners-Lee made the internet useful. He invented World Wide Web, and he enabled HTML. And he was knighted for it. So we got here some technical stuff. We have punch paper tape. We have this stamp here from Costa Rica with one of these computers that's as big as a room. Or from East Germany, big as a room. First computer I worked on, I was at National Cash Register a very long time ago. We had a room-sized computer, maybe not quite as big as this room, had 16K of RAM. Circuit boards. So we have United States, we have Italy, we have Thailand, we have Germany, and we have something that is too small for me to read from up here. How about QR codes? I've read some of these to see what they went to. Normally, they either go to a history of that country or something about their postal service, or, hey, let's go and buy stamps after we scan the code. So we have here Greece, we have Croatia, we have Bosnia, UAE. Who was busy on December 31st, 1999? We were all looking for that little red bug there to come up and kill our computers and guarantee we'd have a job forever. So here's stamps from Indonesia and Gabon. Keyboards. When I'm looking for these things, I'm looking for stuff that the thing I'm looking for is the central thing on the stamp. So we have us from Pitcairn Island, from Israel, from Mauritius, from Spain, United States, a keyboard. How about a printer? Printers spewing all over the place. Some more keyboards. I think we see Apple One, maybe that's an Apple II. I remember those little square screens. And a flash drive. Flash drives. The first flash drive I bought, I think it was like 15 meg, maybe 18, something like that. I bought one a few days ago that's 256 gigabytes. What's the world coming to? How about mice? The first mice were huge. They were the size of a brick. They weighed almost as much as a brick. They were very expensive. But, you know, in the days of Windows 3.0 or 2.0, such as I worked on, you didn't need a mouse very much, but it was available. Compact disc or DVD or just a big round thing. The really pretty stamp up here, this one's from Bhutan, and supposedly it has music on it. You could put it in your computer and play the music. This one, it's just a stamp, a round stamp. It's self-stick, so they could make it any shape they want it to. CRTs. Remember when they weighed 125 pounds? I'll show you one. Cell phones. Now, I've figured out that this is probably a calculator and not a cell phone. But here's, here's a cell phone. It's still got an antenna, even though it just came out. BlackBerry. Taking a selfie. Angola. They're talking on the cell phone. The @ sign, the universal sign of email. And here's some very interesting ones, I think. We've got Tunisia, we've got Switzerland, we've got Yemen, we've got Israel, we've got Wallis and Futuna Islands, and we've got Iran. And some more. Here's Bulgaria. They just use that symbol all over the place. They put it in the middle of the word. And Egypt, celebrating the meeting of the Internet Conference Forum. Bangladesh, Along Islands, Macau, Azerbaijan, I can't read that from here. That's my cow again. Or email. Mexico even gave us a whole browser on a stamp. That's Iran, Morocco, Sri Lanka, Romania. They were doing something about going from the old books to the new. Then we get to country identifiers, the ISO 3166 codes. So, you know, we got the PN for Pitcairn Islands, and this is an island that only has 90 people, but they put out stamps. So, you know, they want us to know that we can go to .pn or Tuvalu, which is almost as small. There's some more. Kazakhstan, Jordan, emoticons. Wow. You never thought about all these things eventually showing up on a stamp. About binary. All those ones and zeros. We've got Armenia. We've got Lithuania, Hong Kong, and Azerbaijan. I never have figured out why Romania wanted to show us a laptop and the statue. But they use this statue on a lot of their stamps lately. And then this one here is Portugal. More social media. Maybe she's looking at Facebook saying, I wonder if I should jump out. Maybe I should kill my account. And Sweden. So there's lots of stamps organizations around. I said I maintain the website for 10 different stamp clubs in St. Louis. So there's something for everybody. If you collect Germany only, if you collect Missouri postal history, if you only collected St. Louis postal history, we have a group for you. But we have some small groups. They actually called me and said, would you run your projector at the Greater Mound City Stamp Club Monday night? And I said, no, I'm not available. I'm going to be talking. There's Webster Grove Stamp Club. I've been a secretary there for 18 years. I thought it was going to be a 2-year gig. There's even the Falkland Islands Philatelic Study Group, of which I've been a member for 45 years. So the Stamp Expo was at the Renaissance Hotel March 15th through the 18th. So you have missed it. It was a week ago. But the next one will be March 29th through the 31st, 2019. I updated their website yesterday. So that's it for me. Questions? It has ruined the sale of stamps. The post office, the U.S. Postal Service, actually had a chance to be in charge of email for the whole United States. And they said, oh, it's not going to amount to anything. We'll let it go. So they did it to them. They did it to themselves. So thank you all.
Thank you, Alan. Ooh. So I have a couple comments while Clint gets set up. First off, I know Alan left you hanging, and I'm going to fix it. So Australia is right here. Japan is right here. Palau is right here, halfway between the two, okay? Was I close, Michael? Right next to Guam. Bing Map showed me that. So Michael is from Guam. He knows all about that. So I have one more, an ask of you. Let me know by a show of hands if you like this new format where we have a short presentation and then a longer presentation. Is yours longer? Okay. I like it. What do you guys think? Yeah? Okay. Well, some of you don't. That's okay. So here's what I have then. Here's my ask for you. If you have a topic that you think your peers here would be interested in hearing, let John know. John, raise your hand again. There we go. And he will schedule you in one of these lightning talks before the main talk sometime. You don't have to have a lot of speaking history. This can be your start. So think about that. And if you have a peer at work that might be interested as well, let them know. All right. So we've heard from Clint before. Clint, has it been a while since you spoke to our group?
It has, hasn't it?
It has.
Yeah.
We're happy to have you back.
Thank
I think you worked for a different company probably when you spoke last or in the time. Anyway, I'm pretty excited to hear from Clint, so let's give Clint a warm welcome.
All right. Thanks, guys. So I kid you not, this came up on my Facebook feed today, and I thought it was so poignant. Have you guys seen this one? It's awesome. Hey, you know, life is full of just serendipitous events, and I think this is one of them. So who's ready to have some fun? Yeah? I would have asked you what you expect out of this talk, but it's probably not what you're going to get. So. But first we need to talk. I checked your commits last night. I've seen your code. We need to talk. How many of you felt that way about some of the code that your coworkers or your peers have checked in? Not our code, never our code, right? No, never our code, right? So what I'm going to show you guys tonight in format of a kind of a show and tell quiz, I guess, I want this to be interactive, is some actual code I reviewed for a client about maybe 9 months ago that turned into this talk. Because, you know, they knew they had problems, but they did not, honestly, they didn't have a place to start. And one of the things I came in and said, look, I'll just look at your code, right? I'm not invested in it. I didn't work on it. I will come through and look at your code. I will, and I did. I went through every line of code, every file in the entire solution, and stack ranked what I saw by priority and by severity, and built them a backlog. And, you know, maybe the top 20 things that we found in that code base actually got addressed. The others are still sitting there, right? This is, I consider code smell just be another form of technical debt, just like refactorings and other things. But what I am going to show you tonight is real code, real production code in a working system. The names have been changed to protect the guilty. A couple of them I had to blur out because I just couldn't make up an example as good as the one that was in there. So you guys get to see it. So. But you can't start to talk without putting in a definition, right? So this is straight off of Wikipedia, I believe. So a code smell, also known as a bad smell in computer programming code, refers to any symptom in the source code of a program that may contain an area of concern. I like that last phrase there, right? According to Martin Fowler, one of the big proponents of clean code and just an all-around amazing craftsman, a code smell is a surface indication that usually corresponds to a deeper problem. What those problems are, we'll talk about. I don't have all the answers. I'm just pretty good at finding this stuff. All right. So I want you guys to become code sleuths. So a smell by definition is something that's quick to spot, right? I can find that pretty quick. It doesn't take long to find it, right? It doesn't always indicate a problem. Most of the time it does, but it doesn't always. The best ones are easy to spot, and what I hope to give you guys today is a toolbox of ways to spot those, right? Everybody know what a Joshua tree is? I'd never heard of that until U2 came out with an album called Joshua Tree. Like, that's what that tree is, right? It's like a tree cactus thing. I'm a big believer that once you can name something, you have mastery over it. And so what I want to show you guys tonight is some examples and some names and definitions for what these examples represent, that hopefully going forward, if you see it, you can spot it, you can now discuss it, because you actually have a term to describe it, right? And I didn't make this stuff up, right? These are all, I'll give you a list of books at the end, places where I've learned these things, but what I've learned over the time is just looking through code and how to spot them. And I'm going to let you guys see some challenges of how to do that yourself. The best part about this is it's pretty easy even for inexperienced people to find them, right? You don't have to be a programmer having coded for 20 years to be able to spot these things, because they are patterns, and we're really good at seeing patterns. It's what we do. So there's a definition, or there's a link to Martin Fowler's Code Smells. He talks, I mean, the guy's a writer, so he wrote an entire novel about this. What I hope to give you guys is a summary of some of it. So are you guys ready? All right. First one. What's wrong with this code? I heard something. A lot of comments? Okay. Comments aren't bad. I like comments. Okay, so the reply is when there's this much commenting, it's not an indicator that the code is intuitive. Yep, so there is a camp that believes that you don't need comments if your variable names and your code is written well enough. How many people subscribe to that? Okay. Comments are out of date, yeah. How about that very first one? Bug number 1173. And then it's got my initials. Those are my initials at the end, CE. Is there any value in that? Is there any value at all in that comment, or the one after it, or the one after that? So the first one describes a line of code that was impacted by a bug. I don't know if they fixed the bug, or if that's where they found and traced the bug. Second one is just some dead code that was replaced by a very similar line. Third one literally says exactly what the code is doing. It's pretty useless, right? And then that last one, it's just clutter, right? That's a to-do. Now, in the old days, I think Visual Studio still does it. If you put in to-do, it'll actually put it in a little list and tell you where all the to-dos are. How many of you have ever gone in and worked on those? A couple of you have, yeah. It also accepts //hack, so that you can document where all your hacks are, so you can find those later. Try it. It's true. It does. So those are collectively grouped into a group called low-value comments. Comments that do not at all enhance the understanding of that code, at all. When do the comments add value? So I am a believer in comments. I tend to like to write comments kind of like the heading of a chapter or a paragraph. About every 5 or 6 lines, I want to write, what's this code supposed to be doing, and then talk about it. And then, you know, carriage return, another paragraph, another comment. But that's just kind of how I got into a rhythm flow. We used to say, what do they call it, PDL, Program Description Language. That's the old term for comments that you wrote before you actually wrote the code. Like, I'm going to go in and put in a comment descriptive of what this method needs to do before I even write a line of code, and then just fill it in afterwards. That kind of term's fallen out of favor, but the best value, the best advice I ever gave is that comment should describe the purpose of the code. Not even the what or the why, just the purpose. Why is this code written? Is it there to document a business rule? Is it there to capture something? Is it there to perform some calculation? Or in some very specific cases, I do believe you absolutely need comments when you're doing something complex. You cannot intuitively look at a matrix transformation chunk of code and know what that's doing. I worked on some game engines for a while. That stuff is sophisticated. You can't just intuit what it's trying to do. So there are times when you absolutely need comments. But the comments that say, don't tread here, or don't touch this code, anybody ever have those in there? Yeah, yeah. Mike worked on this last week. He knows it works. Do not touch it, right? Seriously. There, how about this one? This one. Yes, yeah. Who goes home after writing this and say, nailed it, nailed it, crushed it? Who goes home at night? Come on. We get paid lots of money to write this stuff. What's wrong with this one? This was an easy one. Dead code, yes. large blocks of commented code. And I've seen not just methods, I've seen entire classes, I've seen entire namespaces all commented out, right? What's that? That's pretty awesome. Yeah, the code, yeah. There's more patterns here than I'm going to discuss. In fact, I have a whole laundry list. Michelle, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so awesome. So yeah, I've seen something similar where that there's literally a debate going on between different developers or a conversation over time, right? We didn't have Slack back in the day, right? You had to talk to each other and code somewhere. But yeah, the string builder code there is pretty interesting too, but we'll save that for another day. So dead code. Dead code actually makes it harder to understand what's going on, right? I've seen code where they commented it all out because they couldn't get it working, or it was working and they had to change it, so they left the entire set of commented out code there, rewrote it, or just modified it, but left the original so we could go look at what it used to do and compare it to what we did today, right? That's ridiculous. We don't need that. We can do right-click compare and look at what's in the source tree and go all the way back in many generations as we need to. We don't need to do that, right? So quick fix, delete that crap. Right? You can probably, I'd say on average, any given production piece of code that's in maintenance mode, right? It's been in production for years. People are just adding. There's probably conservatively 5%, maybe 15% of that code could probably just be deleted. If we ever need to see it again, we can look it up in source code. So find the person who did that, beat them with a shoe, and teach them how to use source control. Go look it up, right? But anybody have this stuff? I mean, I can't make this up, right? Some of them go on for pages and pages and pages. So, which reminds me, anybody seen a method like this? Yeah. And I think I chopped it off. I think it keeps going. I think in code review, so in my time as a code reviewer, I've been doing it, I don't know, 10 or 12 years, kind of as a service we offer. 2,700 lines is the biggest I've seen a method. 2,700 lines. Single method. Class files, 13,000 lines long. Why is this bad? Yeah. I mean, how many things can we keep in our head at any given time, right? At Microsoft, we call it the concept count. When you're trying to write a good API or good library, you have to keep the concept count fairly reasonable. Otherwise, people can't even use your software or call it, right? So if that gets more than a couple screens, what's the likelihood you're going to remember the variables at the top when you're looking at code at the bottom, right? The complexity goes through the roof. Is that JavaScript? No, this is C#. All this stuff is .NET. We're at the .NET user group, right? So they're called marathon methods, right? And I honestly believe it's more than a screen full, it's too much. Maybe even another half a screen, maybe. But you know, good OO programming especially is characterized by small methods that do one thing and one thing well. Right? Just chain them. Yeah. What's that? No, you absolutely could not write a test against that at all. My guess is that probably has a whole lot of side effects too. What's going on there, right? It probably does not do one thing. Yeah. So some guidance, some rules I've learned over the years. The method should have at most 10 to 12 steps. Doesn't mean 10 to 12 lines, but 10 to 12 things that it does distinctly. Worked on a team where this was a little bit overkill, but we wrote UML sequence diagrams for every piece of code we wrote. So one senior engineer did everything in the design, and they handed it to a junior engineer who coded it, and then the senior engineer actually reviewed the sequence diagrams and the class diagrams against the code to verify that the design met the intent, the code met the intent of the design. And we had a rule that no more than 12 lines between any two objects, or even between itself. So, and we found that pretty reasonable. Large blocks code should obviously be popped into their own methods, right, for cohesion and clarity. This is a big one that I've learned. You will often find duplicated code. The longer that method gets, the bigger the if statements and the switch statements start to be, and the more likely that somebody copied something way up here, made another copy of it, changed the flow for one other new condition that it applied to, and you've lost state, right? You've lost track of real state, right? And that's the real danger. The longer these methods get, the more likely it is that your object becomes in an indeterminate state, and you have no idea the side effects that might or might not happen. And I think, I genuinely believe, a good-looking method looks like a recipe. And that's when I use the comments. So step 1, need to do this. Here's a small block of code, 3 or 4 lines, 5 lines. Step 2, do this, right? So I do believe in good commenting, but I believe it fits at kind of the paragraph level or the block of code doing one intentional thing. And it's funny because you start to see code like that and you just can't imagine like not writing it that way. Each block has a comment that goes with what that block does or why it's, the purpose of that code, right? So sometimes it's something as, fetch the customers from the information from the database, transform it, right? And small to medium blocks. You don't need a comment for every single line, but you need a line for every kind of step in your recipe. Because let me ask you guys this question. Who are we writing code for? The poor schmuck who has to come behind you and fix your code. That's who you're writing it for. You're not writing it for yourself, which is why most of us are fairly egotistic and write sloppy code, because we think we're writing it for ourselves, but we're not. Ideal situation, you write that code, it rocks, you never have to look at it again, right? You move on to something cooler and greater. You go play with something new. Somebody else's problem, right? So realistically, we write code for the person coming behind us. And I don't have a slide for it, but I read a really good book Stephen King wrote called On Writing. You know what the Stephen King's secret to success is? He writes for the 8th grade reader. So my mantra these days is I kind of write for the 8th grade programmer, not in a demeaning way, but I write for the mass commoditized programmer who's going to come behind me and have not enough time to really dig into this and understand it, just enough time to grok what I put on that method or on that class, make the fix and move on. Right? It's not a matter of, I'm smarter than them, I'm dumber than them. It's about being kind to the person that comes behind you, the follower. Right? Yeah. Quite possible, yeah. So the comment is, couldn't you take that block of that comment, move it to another method, and it becomes its own standalone method? Absolutely. That's what I like about treating a method like a recipe. Like any one of those kind of blocks could be pulled out if there was enough need, right? Or if you turned out that chunk of code is very reusable for another part of that class. Right? Absolutely. It makes it a lot easier, too. All right, next one. Here's a good one. What is wrong? How many things are wrong with this one? At least 9. Looks like 9. Can I buy a switch statement, Pat, for $500? Would a switch statement be easier to read than this? Yes? Yeah, magic strings. That's the really thing wrong with this. Not only these magic strings, these are magic number strings. This is production code, guys. I didn't make this up. This is making a company a lot of money. Is this the end of the world? No. That's a great question. What are the number strings? That would be the first thing I would go after. Right? So it turns out this is a symptom of a bigger problem. So the numbers are stored in a database as strings, is why they are. Because ultimately, the data this company transfers is B2B, so the data all comes in from other sources. And I'm putting my guessing hat on. I imagine somewhere along the line they tried doing it as integers and some data feed broke because there was a bad number in there that wasn't a number. And so they just made it softer and more resilient by turning them into strings. So, yeah. What's the first thing that you guys would do to this code? Declare them as constants. There you go. Set them out as something meaningful rather than a string number, right? What does status code 4 equal, right? And I'll be honest, the web is no smarter than we are. What's return code 200? Okay, what's 404? Well, we all know these numbers because the web taught us to treat it like this, but they should represent something, some piece of information, not just a string. So, yep. Yeah, it could almost be a bit field, right? Yeah. Man, wouldn't it be shocking to come to find out that the original data source of this probably was a bit field somewhere in some mainframe system that's being extracted by, the federal government or some trade organization? And somebody fat fingered that. Should be something else.
Doesn't even exist in the database.
No. So, but we don't know because we don't know what they mean, right? So, magic numbers, hard-coded numbers and string values inside of methods or classes, generally based on an assumption or implicit knowledge, right? There's some implicit knowledge of what a 12 means, and probably that whole team knows what it means because they've debugged that type of code all over the application for months, maybe years, right? So yeah, that was one I actually ranked pretty high because it was throughout the entire application, and we did exactly that. We couldn't do an enum, I forget why, but we ended up defining a static class that just had every one of those as its own value, which turned that code into at least something meaningful. So, you know, and I changed the variable. This wasn't called status code, it was some domain type of code. But then you would just do status code equals, you know, okay, or bad error, or unknown, right? Increase the readability of that code, which thereby increases the maintainability of the code. And ultimately, everybody understands it better. And this is my favorite. It is very susceptible to fat fingering errors, right? It's really easy to turn a 12 into a 13 or 11, or an 8 into an 18. Yeah. Yep. Or one method has a new one, and the others don't have it. So you got to do a search and replace on that set of numbers to find where every one of them has it. So you can see why something like this, as simple as that example is, really is a huge symptom of a bigger problem that could be pervasive and could cause some nasty bugs because somebody forgot one. Or in some methods, it just didn't apply, and so we just ignored it. Nobody ever commented or showed why. Refactor to enums or const, whatever statics, whatever construct in your language makes sense. And JavaScript, by the way, and we're not even going to get into that, but that's a huge problem in JavaScript. They just, because of the nature of the way it grew up out of the web, everything's a quick fix, right? I'm going to just check for 12 there because that's what we keep getting back from that other system. So in that regard, it's a very fast, very bubblegum and shoestring kind of a language, but at the same time, it lacks the power of some of these compiler constructs we have, right? Unless you use TypeScript or the new ECMAScript 6, which, oh, please come sooner. And then if you do need to convert them to strings, it's very easy in .NET to just do toString on an integer or to do 2 ints backwards and get them into some binary or some string format that you have to do for outside the world. But kind of the rule we came up with in this team is like once it gets into our system, it's in that strongly defined type. And only at the boundaries when it leaves our system do we do any kind of code to translate it. Right? So we defined that enum. This is a really nice and clean way we did it. We defined that static class with constants, but also methods to convert between the different directions. So that even if you did do translations, it was all still in one code location where it's locality reference. That stuff makes sense, and that's where we go and work on it. So we kept it all together. Easy fix, and guess what? We found a bunch of bugs because we found cases that were not handled. All over the place, yeah. Multiple layers. Yeah, multiple layers of that application, multiple parts of the domain even. So consolidate them down and put them in one place and put all the translations with that stuff too, right? And there's some great lessons. If you look at the .NET framework, look at integer and decimal and some of the other low-level value types. They did a great job packaging up both the translations in and out of those native types and the operations that go on those in one place. That's good OO. It's just really good OO. Doing that too, right? Another thing, strive to make the application data-driven so that you don't have magic things in there, right? Honestly, the best thing would have been to do is to put that in a lookup table and say, maybe even create a subset on that lookup table. So we take hash table, right? Derive from it, create a method on your derived hash table that says, is valid status code, and have it check that internally, right? We don't need this code in a bunch of our own methods, or have it say is active. Put this entire method on that smart collection that is domain specific to your problem space. And let's stick the constants on there too, so we know when we need to do business logic, we can look next to the same piece of code, right? OO really works. You just have to think about it in terms of OO. All right. How about this one? This is a fun one. What if it's neither? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I actually fat fingered that one. I did that. I had to type this one over. I just saw that too. I like, don't see that. So, yeah. So the question is, this should be simplified down. This is almost the exact same code twice, isn't it? Almost. It's different enough that somebody just in a hurry, I'm just going to copy it, change the 2 or 3 things that are a little bit different. But yeah, this should absolutely be refactored into something a little, I mean, pointers let us point at different things. We don't have to give them all variable names, right? This one's a little more subtle. You guys are awesome. You can see it. So duplicate or triplicate code, which is what that really is. And imagine, picture yourself going on a journey on a 1,000-line method, and you start to see this over and over and over and over again, because that's where it happens. It's not in a method this size. I mean, everybody, just put a variable in there and make that, refactor that down to a single method. It's pretty easy to refactor 12, 15 lines of code. It's not easy to refactor 2,000 lines of code, which is why most people put a big old comment that says, do not tread in here. And that's somebody else's problem, right? It is. You're going in there working on one little user story or one bug that's pretty small, and you go back to the manager and say, I got to refactor this whole 2,000-line method. What are they going to tell you? Yeah, they are almost exactly identical. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Yeah, you could totally repack that in a single method. Yeah. And the best part is it would be less code. Right? I'm a big believer, and I don't think I put it in here, I'm a big believer that less code is more maintainable code. So if you have less lines of code, it's less likely to have a bug in it, more likely to do what you intended it to do, and much easier to follow, right? It just is by nature of the simplicity, right? All right, so duplicate triple. So code fragments that look almost identical could occur when multiple work on a code base, multiple people work on a code base, or are unaware of existing code that could be used or refactored. I've seen code like that where there was a method that did it, but nobody even bothered to look to see if that method already existed because the class was so big and there was too much in it, right? We love locality to reference, whether it's variables, whether it's data, whether it's code we're looking at. A lot of times you'll catch that. It's just literally, I just wrote the method again. I didn't even look to see if it was already there, right? This is the biggest driver, and I'll talk a little more about drivers later. Haste. Does haste ever come into your day? Clint, we do not have time to rewrite this entire application. Just give me that new method and fix that bug. We got to get it out the door tomorrow, right? But the last day of the sprint, which is when all the bugs show up, right? And never at the beginning, right? We got to fix it. We got to get out the door, right? So my advice, refactoring is not something you do later. I think everybody knows about refactoring these days. If you don't stop, at least to some degree, mitigate that damage, it will make refactoring even harder, right? Can you guys, a long method that keeps growing just compounds your risk and compounds your problem, right? So even if you can only refactor in the small, it really is a case where tidying up the shop after every day makes the code base a better place. If at all possible, red-green refactor, right? Test-driven. So you write the test, it turns red. You refactor the code, it turns green. And that's another very common thing I see. Like, we don't have time to go write tests. Well, you have time today to write your first one. Start from there, right? Which would you rather have? No unit tests on a 500,000 line code base, or 10 unit tests, right? Any amount of unit tests is better than 0. And if you get into a habit and you teach your team that habit, it will grow over time. I've seen people propose, we want a project to go just write unit tests for this application. I've seen them funded, but that's really not the best way to do it. The best way is just start today, start now, and write a test. And you don't even have to write a test for everything the method does. Just write a test that verifies that the change you made works. Then the next person that comes behind you can write another one. So there is incremental benefit. And it's always such a war, like it's all or nothing. We don't do unit testing because we're just too busy or we don't have time. Like, start somewhere. It starts with one test. This is a big one. You are a professional developer. You're getting paid lots of money. Make sure this stuff works before you check it in. Make sure it's right. Make sure it's the best work you can do. That's my inspiration for you guys. I want you doing your best work. And if you feel like you're being pushed, if you're being coerced into writing subpar code, you got to fight back. If you don't, it sets a trend and it sets a pattern. And if the team gets in that mode, it's just your life is going to be worse for it. All right, here's a good one. How about this one? A little bit more. A little bit more. A little bit more. And I had to stop because the screen wasn't big enough. Yeah, wow, yeah. This is actually part of the .NET framework. This isn't from the client. This is HTTP request, the object we use, a lot of us use every day. Right? Why is this bad? Too much responsibility, yeah. At some level, every object is a state machine. But if you have too many variables, you can't track the state. It can be a completely inconsistent state, and you can't know that, right? Too big. Yeah, I stopped about halfway through this, but I've seen this, so I could not put the code for the real example up here because it had too many proprietary names in it. And if I'd have blurred it all out, you wouldn't even know what it was. So I took this from the .NET framework, but guaranteed the one I saw was as bad as this. It's just too much to comprehend what this class is doing, right? Too much. Too many states, too many properties and attributes doing too many things, too many methods that interoperate on some subset of those at any given time. Right? They call this one the blob. Lots of methods and properties making the code difficult to read, understand, and troubleshoot. Right? Too many responsibilities. So here's a fun one, though. Can this be broken down? This is a hard one. This is the monolith, right? When you build an application like this, the entire application becomes a monolith. It gets harder and harder to break it down, right? So just like what do they say? How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time? Yeah. Start looking for small patterns and small wins, and you just kind of eat away at these things to break it up. An exercise that I don't see anybody doing anymore, it's called CRC. You write down these cards, you put class, responsibility, and on the back you put collaborators. And you start talking about what's going on in the system, and you start identifying what the right objects are to do what parts of that. And that's a great way to decompose a giant like that, because I guarantee that thing's doing way more than it should do. All right. How about this one? So this is working code. I did blur it. It's a fun one. Anybody have any ideas? Yeah, so it's generating a report, which nobody likes to write that code, but somebody ends up having to do it anyway. So a lot of hard-coded numbers, strings in there, right? But Yep, could be very well be data-driven. Here's my issue with that code, literally my. Where do you usually see variables named my? Sample code, well in VB, but it's more broadly, and sample code written by a vendor, right? So my guess is this is the first time my code was ever written in my project. The lesson here for me, at least when I work with junior developers, is that's tutorial code. You just literally copied straight out of a tutorial and dumped it into my production code. I don't want to see that. At least come up with your own variable names. But more importantly, that was probably a tutorial. Somebody grabbed it off the web, slapped it in there, and hacked it up to get it working, right? They were in a hurry. First project they ever worked on, right? I mean, it happens. So catching that in code review. Does that make sense to you guys? I mean, what professional code should ever have the word my variable name in it? It's just, I mean, I don't mind if college kids or students are putting stuff out like that, but if this is production code, you're getting paid quite a bit of money to write and put in a production system. That's too junior. But usually when I see that, it usually underlies a bigger problem that it's probably pretty buggy because they just copied the code and really didn't understand what it's doing. Right, that's that second line. So code semantics are frequently different from the problem being solved. They took an example from some vendor's sample code, jammed it in there. Whether or not that was all completely the right solution to the problem they're trying to solve or not, that was what they started with, and it was hacked and hacked and hacked until it fit and looked like it got the output. So a lot of times that code ends up, it just wasn't quite, I mean, how many of you guys ever looked up sample code and it's like, that's not what I need, right? That's what the vendor wants to show you how to do with their library, but inevitably what we need to do is way more complicated than what the vendor samples show. Way more, always. Microsoft, you know, all the third-party component libraries, all of them, they give you the simple, I mean, I used to write that stuff and show it on stage. So they give you the simple happy path case. They never include error conditions, right? And so what you get is a lot of code that's basically happy path for some problem that may or may not even be the use case you're trying to solve. So here's the rule that we come up with working with teams is you don't check that code in. If you're learning how to use a library or a framework or a technique, put a branch out there called R&D and go play it all day long. Write that code somewhere else, not in production code. When you're ready for it to go into production code, transpose it, give it real variable names, put it in the right namespaces. Oh, by the way, a lot of times when I see that code, guess what the namespace is? The one from the sample. It doesn't even match the rest of the application. And that's really easy to find because you look in Solution Explorer, you see all the namespaces for the company and their product, and you see like, you know, infragistics.my. Like, nah. So do it somewhere else. You can, you know, Visual Studio is really easy. File a new project, you got it, there. Get it working. And that's actually the rule we had is anytime we were doing R&D, you could work on it, call it whatever you want, but when you were ready to put it into the real code base, even in your R&D, start putting the namespaces of our production code in there so that the example is really solving the problem we want. It's going to be a drop-in. But until you're ready to do that, that code is not ready for prime time. Anybody else feel strongly about it now, like I do? Drives me nuts. My worksheet. So yeah, re-implement it in the production code. The purpose of those tutorials is to teach you the framework, not to be copy and drop and go with it. And I call this term, I should put it on a t-shirt, intent-driven development. We'll talk more about that later, but this production code that code should be what was intended to be built to solve that problem that code is trying to solve. All right, next one. On regions, they have their place in gigantic files and large classes. Yeah. 2 classes in the same file. Yeah, I could slam on that one. There's something a little bit deeper going on in this one. Implementation of Dijkstra's PV semaphore based on the monitor class. In .NET. Do you need to write your own implementation of Threadpool with Dijkstra's PV monitor class? Yes, of course. Michelle says use the free one. Yes, the framework. Oh, that was use. I thought you said use the free one. Yeah. So, again, pretty easy to spot this. Why did somebody bother to write this? Well, first of all, they probably didn't write it. They probably copied off the internet. Why did they not use one that's built in, that's written by the people who wrote the framework and the operating system? Probably going to be better than somebody's comp sci project. Is probably what this was. Right? I mean, I wrote code like this in grad school. We had to implement this stuff to learn it. That does not mean you drop it into a production system making millions of dollars. So this is, yeah, and maybe it was in .NET 1.1 when they didn't have that, but I don't know. I didn't see that in the timestamp. So not invented here syndrome, right? I don't trust Microsoft. How could they possibly write a better thread locking system than me? I went to grad school. I learned about semaphores and mutexes and critical sections. I can write that stuff. I mean, I did it, guys. I'm guilty of this too. I'm not pointing blame at other people things I haven't done myself. Does that reinvent the wheel? Abso-freaking-lutely. You do not need your own library. If you did, and they subsequently created one, you should make that a priority to get off of yours and onto the one that's written by the platform as fast as you can, right? And especially, what's happened to threading over the years in .NET changed. The metaphor and the paradigm for doing threading completely changed like 4 times in the history of .NET. Right now, there's the task parallel library, And I think they've even simplified it with the async and await. You don't even think in terms of threads anymore. They just take care of themselves to some degree. So. I don't mind regions. Michelle's the one that didn't like them. No, I'm good with regions if they make sense. The smell on regions is if it's big enough you need regions, it may be starting to get a little too big. But yeah, yeah, we should talk about that one over beer afterwards tonight. I don't know. I've gone a number of different ways with regions. The old days, coming as a C++ programmer, we had the public, the internal, the private sections of code, and they were very distinctly in different places, maybe even different files depending on how your includes were. So when I first started C#, the public stuff was at the top, which is great because if you're consuming it, you just pop that open. You don't ever have to look at how it's implemented. So these days, it's pretty sloppy where things are like implementation, public, private, internal are all over the place. I mean, either way, I would group them near the functional areas of responsibility or by their exposure to the outside. Yeah, Eric. Oh, ORMs? Yeah, yeah. How many people have written their own ORM? Yeah. How many times have Microsoft revved their ORM and others? Yeah. Yeah. I got a client still a big believer in LLB Gen. Remember that one? Yeah. But they're not going to change it. They're where it is. But aren't private methods hard to test? They can be now that you can do friend on assemblies and you can just you just make them internal. But yeah. It's possible, yeah. So the comment was, does it make sense to refactor private stuff into another class if you could test it? I think it might. It depends on just how much is going on. If there's probably that much going on, maybe that should have been a separate class anyway, right from the beginning. But, yeah. Right. I tell you, most of the time, private classes or private methods inside a class for me are usually a consolidation where there's one master private method and the inputs vary and you put in defaults. So you may have 4 or 5 public methods that. Right, yep. Yep, you guys hear that? Yeah, so just reinforcing what I said, if that complexity gets high enough, that really should be a separate object with its own responsibility, right? Maybe even you have a facade object and then the implementation, right? And in the old days, yeah, just kind of brokers. There's a number of different names for those patterns. The old days we used to do, it was called, in C++, it's called a pimple pattern, private implementation. And I've since subsequently used that pattern in C#, but really what you're doing is, and you may even do it for a number of reasons, you may have multiple implementations of the real algorithm or the real thing, and you just have a facade in front of it. But yeah, your point is very well taken. If you need to test that thing, put it up on a bench, plug in wires, and zap it. You need to make sure that's exposed. Anyway, back on track. So this, anybody disagree that somebody probably should not have pasted it in there? Just use what's already in the framework. Certainly don't put source code to this because somebody's going in and mess that up. And I guarantee the person that put that in there is probably no longer on the project. So I did want to comment on this too. So I hope by watching this, you guys realize that code tells a story, which I think is fascinating. It tells a story about the history, where it came from, about where it's going. It tells a story about the motivations behind it, right? And that's really, at the end of the day, this is about people, right? It is, because multiple people work on big systems, and you've got to be able to manage that. So big picture here, leverage well-known frameworks. Don't rewrite the algorithm, especially fundamental computer science stuff. And more importantly, avoid creating your own nightmare that you'll have to maintain. All right, so last pattern. I don't even have an example from this, but I just love it. Thank you, Internet, for showing what I believe, and I don't have to do it. So, trusting someone else's code to solve your problem without truly understanding how it works. Who's done it? Come on, put your hands up. Yeah, a long time ago. I don't do it now. We've all done it, right? I mean, it happens, right? So, again, I call it intent-driven development. I don't write any line of code unless I know what I intended it to do, and to the best of my ability, when I hit check-in or commit, it's doing what I intended it to do. I didn't copy it and go, right? Code with intent and purpose, and understand every line of code you write. Yeah, Bill. No, that was an internet meme that went around not too long ago. I mean, it doesn't have to be a real book. That the title of the cover page is the book, right? All right, so there are many, many, many more patterns out there. These are just some that I actually found in this assignment. Here's a homework assignment for you. Some other fun ones to go look up. You guys can grab the slide deck. And these are even more, some of these are even more sophisticated. The one I showed you guys are really easy to spot, wouldn't you say? They're really easy to spot. Some of these can be a little more tricky, like leaky abstractions. When you let parts of your internal implementation leak out, so your client knows how you do what you do when they don't need to. Yep. Leaky abstractions, pretty common. Yep. 7-layer cake, that's another fun one. Anybody have an idea what that is? How many namespaces or layers of your application does it go from the UI down to get to a database? At some point, you need layering, you need some partitioning and abstraction, but you don't need 7 layers of it. Specifically, I think that pattern applies to the number of levels of inheritance that certain frameworks have. Windows Forms is about 11 or 12 levels deep in inheritance before the one you actually use in code. If you walk backwards in the inheritance tree, it's nuts. And some of them you inherit, it's got one method on it. Like, consolidate that down. It didn't need to be a level of abstraction because there's nothing else branched from it. It was one level of class declaration and derived from another that just forwarded on to another declaration. They're all abstract. And I think there's actually another pattern that's all about just like, you don't need to do that. Oh yeah, it's called OOO. That's the name of the pattern. If somebody's learning OO and they just go nuts with it, everything's OO, right? This, that, it's just, we can use abstraction there. We can do virtual functions there, right? Production code is not the place to learn how to program, but it is the place where we all learn how to program. So I'm beating up all these bad programmers, but we all are there. We are all somewhere on this journey, right? But there are definitely known things that can and should be fixed. Some of these are pretty crazy. All right, so where do these come from, right? So everywhere, yeah. From Kevin. From that person that no longer writes code anymore, they moved on and got promoted into management. All right, so some primal forces. Primal forces. These are driven by human things. We don't get up and go to work wanting to write bad code. So haste, number one. Anybody been pushed to get something done quickly? Haste? Yep. I want you guys to think about all these ones I'm going to show you and think of which one you think is probably the most common cause for yours. All right, sloth, making poor decisions based on the easy answer. Not me, that's probably one of your teammates, right? It's pretty close to this, yeah. Actually, I already have a cool title. I might use that as the next title. Apathy, not caring. Anybody work in an environment where there's some apathy? Yeah, there's a lot of that in big IT especially. Well, today's problem will just be, it'll be there tomorrow, or we fix this one, there'll just be another one tomorrow, right? You see how that cascades into more and more problems? Yeah. Narrow-mindedness, this is the Dijkstra MP algorithm for thread pooling. Like, why do you need to, I can't rely on Microsoft. I don't trust them. I can write a better one, right? And I don't mean to attend any Mensa people in the room, but we had a team member who was Mensa that just liked a good problem to work on. Solutions were pretty awesome because it was a good problem, yeah. It was a monster, yeah. But trying to identify a readily available solution to a problem that could solve it faster and easier than rewriting the whole thing or writing it yourself. Might be worth pursuing a little bit. All right, here's a big one, avarice. I am very guilty of this one. The form of greed. I'm more interested in furthering my own pursuits of software development and computer science and craftsmanship. Hey, all right. I am very guilty of this. A lot of us do this because it's interesting and fascinating, and we learn and we grow from it, sometimes beyond what the project needed or the code needed. Right? I wrote an awesome string class one time. It took me about 5 weeks. It had everything we'd ever need to do with a string. It was in C++ back in Beasters. You guys remember that? I forget what it even stands for anymore, but it was basically Unicode strings. We had to translate those back into ANSI strings. This library went both directions. It even had a third format that you could store stuff in. I spent 3 or 4 weeks on that, and all we just needed was a couple methods back and forth. But I was learning, I was growing, I was having fun. It cost my company 10 grand, 12 grand, no reason. But we do this because we love it, and it's fascinating, and it's engaging, right? Just be aware that sometimes you're putting your own wants and needs above that of the project. And then ignorance, failing to seek an understanding before solving a problem. Let's just go grab some sample code off the net, slap it in there. Looks like it does what we need. Good enough. Right? Then pride, not invented here. Right? These ring true to you guys? Like these are. I spent a lot of time thinking about this. Like, why do I have to review this code? Because somebody's not doing what they're supposed to be doing. Right? So these are what I consider kind of primal forces that cause it. We're all guilty of some of these to some degree or another. Not me. Yeah. All right. So what do we do about them? Yeah. Throw our hand. No way. I just told you what's causing them. What do we do about them, right? We are rational beings, right? So, anybody ever seen this message? This is brilliant. This is actually in .NET code in a bunch of places, right? This code was generated by a tool. It's real simple. Don't be a tool, right? Don't be on autopilot. If you're on autopilot, whoop, too far. If you're on autopilot, these forces will work against you, right? So the whole point of this is intent-driven development is just be intent, be conscious of what you're working on, recognize that there are outside forces forcing you to take these shortcuts. We all do this. Right? Nobody's guilt-free in this room. We all do these things. But by and large, if we recognize that we're susceptible to these, we can control our emotions and maybe do a little bit better job. So thank you, guys.
Are there any questions for Clint before we close up? I have to admit, Clint, I'm pretty sure one of those slides came from me. I look like my code. So.
My intent of the talk is for everybody in the room to feel like uncomfortable in their chair, thinking some of that came from there. Yeah. I will give a project an enema. Yes. So I will do it. So a funny story. So I was at Anheuser-Busch, and I was on a team that troubleshot problem applications and production. And what we ended up doing is an app was back then. The ASP.NET Worker pool was shared, and any single app could bring it down. This is .NET 1.1, 1.2-ish timeframe. So if you had an app that was bad, it was potentially bouncing 20 to 50 other apps. So we got sent in, and our big whammy was you can't go into production again until you have a code review, an architecture review. So I got really good over a period of 3 years of going in, reviewing a chunk of code, and finding what was wrong with it and getting it back into production. So actually, I mean, it sounds boring, but it's not. I mean, if you know what you're looking for, you can find this stuff pretty quickly and pretty easily. And I do. I start at the top of the solution. I just go literally one file at a time, open up each file, scan it, and about, I don't know, half a screen per second, and that stuff jumps out. If you know what you're looking for, it's easy to find. Hey, Brian. He's had some of my, he's been a recipient of one of my code reviews at AB.
I didn't point out the smell of your white space usage, but it's been bugging me for about 15 years. I'm just curious how many in the room have code reviews as part of their normal check-in process. Good.
About 7, 8 hands out of 40? Not bad. How many check in and pray, commit and pray? Nobody raises their hands. Come on. One, okay. Go ahead.
Is there a counterbalance to the NIH problem? Because sometimes the solutions that are out there just don't fit and aren't sufficient enough. So is there a counterbalance that where you do have intent and you are exploring something?
Right. So the question is there how do you describe it? Is there counterbalance between non-invented here syndrome and the ability to you got to get it working, right? So in my mind, at least you exhausted the possibilities first before you reinvented it, right? You invented. So a lot of what we do is experimental, right? We are building new software all the time. So there are cases where you will need new stuff. Anybody here last month for Spencer Schneiderbach's talk? He basically invented a new way to generate code for what the unique problem they were solving. So great, elegant solution. It was a little high in complexity, which makes it a little scary to maintain, but it really nailed what he was trying to do from a business rule perspective. I thought it was pretty cool. I think the big danger is once an app kind of goes into maintenance mode where there's not a lot of new stuff, just occasional new features and bug fixes. What tends to happen is the original team moves on, and new people come in, tend to be junior, tend to be their first project, and you can have a really great app that just slowly starts to kind of. Yeah, the question, can you mitigate with unit? So I'm sure to some degree, but I think you also need adult supervision, doing code reviews. If that application is that important to your company or business, you need to keep good people on it. You can't just let it go fallow or go cheap. It's too risky. Eric?
Yeah, just another response to that. I think pushing back on the requirements, because sometimes requirements are put in and they don't recognize that the ramification of that requirement means that now I have to add this new framework. And then once they recognize that that's the cost, they may rethink that requirement. And that's something you see over and over. So giving pushback.
That's a great point. I try to think of myself as a consultant as much as I am a developer on projects. You're not there just to be we call it, Polaris would say, don't be a short order cook. Don't just take what they write on the paper, spin it around the wheel, you grab it and you code it. It's in their best interest and our best interest to bring everything we've got to the game every day and build the best software. And avarice, sloth, those all play in if you're not keeping that in top of your mind all the time. There will be some crazy requirements come through, won't there?
So what kind of things can we say to upper management to kind of, I guess, scare them into allowing refactoring and taking time to improve code? I know at my company we're guilty of haste. Can we talk about maybe the risk or the ROI of bugs, things like that?
Yeah. So great question. What I do when I do these code reviews is I end up generating a spreadsheet, 50, 80, 100, 300, however many things I find, each file name and each line where I found it, or method name where I found it. And then I stack rank them and I prioritize them as high risk. That's part of, it's not just a code review and I say, you sucked here. I actually tell them this really needs to be fixed. Or sometimes I'll find a threading bug. Like, you really need to fix this because your app's broken, right? So I stack rank them on severity levels like 1 to 5. And then what we do is hopefully they're using an agile backlog. and we'll try to get those worked into the backlog, and then every sprint you knock down 5% or so of your backlog is tech debt. This is nothing more than tech debt, that whole list I produce. So, and a good healthy team, every sprint should have 5 to 15% technical work just ongoing to keep the house clean, and the other 75 or 85% is new value add for the customers. So that's the best approach I've seen. It gives you a little bit of what you need, and it's a long road. You're not gonna get a whole sprint to just fix tech debt. If you do, then your business is not smart for letting you do that. I mean, I have clients, they've been working on components for 2 years and never shipped. Like, who spends that money? Right? It does need to ultimately be about their value, but if you can get a prioritized list and explain to them the impact of this, short-term and long-term, then that's your best weapon to go up and say, we've got to work on this now. And you got to break them down in little chunks, right? So the question is, can that be automated by a static code analyzer? So yes and no. It's not going to find some of those bigger patterns. It will certainly find some small stuff. It won't find that you're using literal strings instead of numbers or constants, right? So some of these, until they get better ways to look at your code, I don't know. But I also use code analysis in conjunction with this as when I start doing a stack ranking. So I may go through this and find, I don't know, average is 80 to 100 items worth addressing. And then I'll run code analysis, and it's going to basically give me a heat map of where the most highly critical code is. And I just factor my ranking higher because of that. Right? Those tools should be run, and you should ideally be setting bars on the compilation steps to not allow some code if some of those don't pass. Right? There's another thing we'll do as an exercise with the team is we'll go through code analysis and pick the rules that everybody agrees are non-negotiable, and that will be part of your build. We'll turn those rules on, and it does not pass a build unless those rules are met. But we don't write custom rules. There's no time for that. Yeah.
Given that we are talking about .NET, and more than likely people are coding in Visual Studio, and you're talking about code analysis, how meaningful do you find the code analysis results to be? Because if you're running solid green all the time, can you rely on that? Or is it just one of several indicators? And because I don't know that I've ever seen it go orange or red.
Never seen yours go orange or red? Oh, boy. They don't usually call me if it's like that, so I can't tell you if that's the norm. But
can you really rely on that, or is actually?
Absolutely, you can absolutely rely on that as a baseline. So once you get a code base in a good known state, yeah, keeping that maintainability index above a 70, keeping your cyclomatic complexity low, absolutely brilliant thing to do for your. And in fact, you can even make the compiler. Yeah, I don't say that's not going to find other things, but that's a darn good place to be. Yeah. Oh yeah, I think they're not in the room. We did it. So I used to work for Microsoft, and we used to go demo the code complexity tools. And we were demoing it one day. I think it was Visual Studio 2010 when they first came out with it. I kid you not, somebody in the back row was just started laughing, crying at the same time, like because they ran it while we were demoing it. And yeah, the maintainability index was just 0.08, like it was bad. Yeah, same thing. Production code, running, selling software, but I would look at those. So I'll run those when I first start looking at code, just to see what I'm dealing with, right? And if they're in the basement, then you know you got big problems, right? But if you can keep that in the 80 to 90 range, I do believe the maintainability index does find that the methods are small, they're fairly cohesive. I mean, it's not perfect, but you can keep cyclomatic complexity down and the size of your classes and methods and the coupling, you go a long way to being way more maintainable than the other situations. Not in and of itself going to protect you, but it's certainly, I don't know, I'm trying to think of another analogy. It's like having seatbelts. I mean, they certainly help. They keep you on the right place. So, better if they don't. Yeah, absolutely keep running them. They are worth it. And another way we've used them is to make an argument that we needed to get our maintainability up to a 70% maintainability index, right? Every class, every method, and we weren't. And so every sprint, we would ask for a certain number of story points to go pay that down and get towards that. And you can see it start to climb up if you do it right. I like them. I like them a lot. Awesome. Get out of here.
Thanks, Clint. Before you go, a couple quick things. The next 2 months, user groups are not on the traditional last Monday of the month. Okay, so take note, they are not on the last Monday of the month. Next Monday's is Saturday, or next month is on Saturday, and the next month after that conflicts with Memorial Day. So we've moved it 2 weeks ahead, I think, right? So please take note of those. And one other thing tonight, after we leave here, we're going over to Westport to hang out. If you'd like to come, you're welcome to come. We'd love to have you. We're going to go to Trainwreck or Fuzzy's Taco if there's a crowd at Trainwreck. Sometimes there is. One other thing, if you have some friends that used to attend here and no longer do, why don't you drop them an email and say, hey, we miss them. With our transition to Meetup.com, we kind of left some people behind. And as people transition jobs, their emails sometimes get left behind as well. So if you have some old friends who used to come and don't anymore, just give them a gentle reminder, hey, we'd love to have you back. So free advertising for us. Thanks for that. All right, have a great night. Thanks for coming.